Can you hear me? Yeah, very good. So first, let me welcome you to this wonderful event in Miami. The best thing about this place is the weather. I'm from Singapore, and I felt like I've come back home. A lovely place. Thank God this wasn't in Toronto or in Chicago or somewhere else. Those of you who have been here before, and I see a lot of familiar faces, and those of you who've never been here before, I'm sure I'm going to see you here next year again, because that's what this event has been. It's been a special event for all the people who've been participating in it over the years. I'm told, at least by some of them, in my previous two Confluence events, that this is the best learning event that they attend. I don't know how true that is, but at least some of you have said that. And I guess Sapnesh and his team have a bit of a challenge to make sure it remains that every year. My session usually is very simple. I tell you the story about what happened to NIIT for the last 35 years and focus a little bit more on what happened than last year. But I'm not going to do that today. Today, I have a slightly different agenda. You see it out there. I have the privilege of not having to operate at the ground level. I can talk in terms of the mega trends that we can see ahead of us and what the implications might be on your companies, on individuals, on society and governments, and therefore, obviously, on us in the learning community and what it might mean for how we need to take our discipline forward. So it's a bit of crystal ball glazing. Some of the stuff that you see here and here might sound a little far-fetched, but in today's world, nothing is far-fetched, is it? Things are changing so fast that what we think is just a little idea, suddenly 3 years later becomes a billion-dollar company. And it's happening all around us. So I think it's worth our while to use that crystal ball and look ahead a little bit into the future to make sure that we are on the path that will be relevant in our companies and our respective disciplines. So a little bit of the last year. I'm not going to spend too much time on the slides. You don't need to take notes on what's on the slides because you're going to get a copy of the slides anyway. If there's something outside of that, of course, be welcome to do that. Politically, big trends, unbelievable occurrences. I think, for example, Brexit. Most people in the UK didn't think Brexit would actually happen, even the ones who voted for it. And I think what we're seeing around the world is a kind of reaction to globalization. Okay. Social reaction to globalization. You're seeing that in the US, you're seeing that in India before, when they brought the BJP into power, you've seen that in many other countries. So there is something happening there. And many of us in this room work for multinational companies. So there is something that creates uncertainty. And for us as a company that works across borders, we also see a little bit of that uncertainty, and we need to be aware of that. Okay. Macroeconomics, I don't need to highlight this. The US, after some time, has started to look good in terms of growth rates. Of course, there are some questions about it. China is beginning to slow down. The yuan is depreciating, expected to depreciate another 8% this year. Euro continues to remain weak. And the emerging markets is a mixed bag. There are countries like India which are doing very well, but there are countries which were supposed to be the stars like Brazil and a couple of others are suddenly not doing so well. A little bit of mixed bag. Coming closer to home, microeconomics, which is our world of industry and companies, at least 4 big trends that we can see. The sharing economy, you talk about Airbnb, you talk about Uber, you talk about many other companies, how they are knitting together third-party assets and people to create a completely new form of organization and the speed at which these organizations are growing. Okay. That's a relatively new phenomenon, but we're seeing that really becoming mainstream over the last year. The gig economy, Sapnesh talked about that. They say that 50% of jobs in the US are not going to be employees. I don't know how true that is. But the fact that a lot of people are saying that means it's going to be partially true at least. Now, what does that mean for us as training professionals? Are we going to have half the number of people in the future in our companies? And does that mean we have to train third parties? Or do you expect them to train themselves? What is going to have to change? Will the government have to step in? All kinds of new questions. Digital model disruption. I think we're seeing it around us, irrespective of the industry. Completely new models are emerging, even in the mainstream industries. And that obviously has implications on us as training professionals, because we have to do something about educating our workforce, starting from the senior management, who are probably the most disconnected from what's possible to happen in the digital world. Okay. So in the room, we have Barry Libert here, who is a speaker tomorrow. He's also the digital advisor to NIIT. He's also digital advisor to a number of organizations in the US, and he writes frequently for Harvard Business Review and Wharton. So I think you'll find this session very interesting on this subject. And then the emergence of this whole new concept or animal called the exponential organization. Organizations that are designed to grow at exponential growth rates. And I'll talk a little bit more about that later. All these have profound implications, ultimately on your company, but ultimately on you as training professionals in terms of how you have to deal with your workforce in your organization. Technology. I think we've seen enough of this, but interestingly, I think 2016 will go down as the year when many technologies that we've been talking about for years have finally become mainstream. I recall when I was in management school way back in 1983, I was actually more interested in artificial intelligence than business management. And I actually wrote artificial intelligence programs, heuristic programming. And we thought AI was the next big thing and it'll transform the world, and so did Greg in those days. It's taken a long time, but over the last 2-3 years, there's been profound change. And AI has really got into almost every discipline, every role, every organization, every industry. Big data, robotics. I don't know how many of you have seen the robots that can actually come home and help you, help your children learn. They're available today. Anybody seen them? Very few hands, but things are happening right in front of our noses, which are profound. VR and AR, gaming and simulation, I would add them all into the same space. How many of you have used this game? What's it called? Pokemon Go. Anybody played this? I had a terrible holiday in Spain in August because my wife got caught on to Pokemon Go. And all she was doing, going around everywhere, was playing Pokemon Go. But the power of that technology, can you imagine what more you can do with it? Because right now, you are just creating virtual objects linked to spaces, and you're using your camera to connect to that. But now you can feed other things into it because your camera is now an input into the game. And if that was being captured, then suddenly you have all kinds of connections and new possibilities with that technology. So VR and AR is now becoming mainstream, and I can think it's going to have a tremendous impact on our industry. And of course, from a technology perspective, the whole issue of cybersecurity is becoming critically important. So what are the big questions? I think there are 3 big questions. One is an OECD report which says that by 2050, the average human being in the OECD countries will live to more than 100 years old. The average. Just think of what that means. If we lived for more than 100 years, most of us will be bankrupt before we die, right? So that's one side of it. But that's only the financial side. There are many other aspects to it. I'll talk a bit more about that. The second is the future of work. This whole concept of robots and automation and what it will do to the average workforce. And is it going to eliminate 30%, 40%, 50%? And this is serious stuff. The World Economic Forum has been discussing this for the last 3 years. It's not something new. Countries are talking about universal basic income because they think we might just have to pay people to live because we won't have enough jobs for it. What does it mean for us as training professionals? In fact, are we the hope for the world? If we can do our jobs better, we could make such a profound contribution to solving this problem. Okay. And therefore, it comes to what does this mean for us as learning professionals? And I'll spend most of my session on that. So let's just go through a short snippet. This is an extract from a book written by the London School of Business called The 100-Year Life. And if there are 2 books that you read this year, and you only like to read 2 books, please read this book and read the other book called The Exponential Organization.
We're all going to live a lot longer. Some of us up to 100 years and beyond. For the last 2 centuries, life expectancy has risen by around 3 years every decade. That adds up to a lot more time. As a result, the 3 stages of education, work and retirement will no longer exist. What will come in its place? London Business School professors Linda Grattan and Andrew Scott have been thinking through the impact of longevity on the world. Everything will change, for people, businesses and governments. The key to a successful 100-year life will lie in how we use all the extra time we'll have. One thing we'll have to do is work longer. Retiring at 65 won't be an option unless we have many, many more savings. And the education we received in our teens is unlikely to see us through our career, especially as new technologies and jobs emerge. What's more, no one will be able to maintain the same pace in work. Because a good and productive life needs more than just money, it depends on intangible assets too, like family, friendship, and love, good health, new knowledge and skills, and extraordinary experiences. We're likely to try different careers, take breaks, move to new cities, and reinvent ourselves several times over. We will be living a multi-stage life, where activity and age become disconnected. How can you get ready for this radical change? Linda and Andrew have a few ideas. Audit your tangible and intangible assets today and start planning for your future. Use your free time to invest in fitness, skills and relationships. Think about the experiences you want to have and plan for them. Experiment. There are no role models to follow, just your passions. Be flexible and open to change. Explore your options. Longevity isn't just about getting older. It's really about being younger for longer. How are you going to put your extra time to good use?
Anybody read this book? You better read it as learning professionals. But forget about the learning part. Please read it for yourself, but even more for your children, because they are all going to be in that category. I don't want to go through the book. I'd leave it for you to read it. But I think the key point that the book is trying to make is that the concept of investing in learning for the first 21 years of your life, and then expecting that investment to be giving you adequate return to see you through a 40-year or 35-year career is gone. It's not going to happen. Because now, number one, you can't just retire at 65, because if that leaves you 35 plus years after that, you're just not going to have enough savings to survive. Pure economics. Second, you might not even survive the 40 years because things are changing so fast today. All of us already experienced that. It's very rare to have a person going through a single career in a single industry for all their 40 years of working life, which means transitions are going to become critical. We have to prepare people for transitions. Now the question is, what is the role of the company in preparing people for transitions? What's the role of the individual in preparing people for themselves for transitions? And what's the role of the government? The third one is an important question, actually. So what it really talks about is that you've got to focus on investing in not just your productive assets, which of course is learning, but also your vitality assets, because it's something got to keep you going through that period of your life. And of course your tangible assets, because you need to live. But more important, you need to invest in transformative assets. These are assets which will help you successfully handle successive transitions that you have to go through in your life. And the role of the learning organization has to therefore go beyond just training people on knowledge and skills, but also on those special transformational capabilities, so that people can actually make those transitions. And that means there is a social compact that companies and training departments will have to focus on, which go beyond perhaps the more limited role that we have had to play so far. And of course, the question comes, where does the government fit in and where do we fit in? So if I were to summarize, for individuals, much longer productive careers, inevitable multiple transitions, lifelong learning is now critical. It's no more something we talk about, it's real. Okay? You've got to take care of lifelong learning for yourself. For companies, you're going to have people who are the millennials, the baby boomers, and three or four generations in one working in the same company. And because people are not going through a life where they're going through a career in one direction, you'll have a 70-year-old doing the job of what a 20-year-old is doing. You'll have a 40-year-old doing the job of what a 60-year-old is doing. And you're going to have mixes of all these kinds of people. And how are we going to operate as an HR function? How are we going to prepare our managers and leaders for this? And what's our role in preparing all these people for that as training organizations? Employee versus protected, flexible worker. What do I mean by this? There's this whole shift towards the gig economy. There's also a lot of regulation and social questions that are being raised about the gig economy. Are we exploiting individuals? Not paying them social security, expecting them to take care of their own problems. There is going to be regulation, let me tell you. This is not going to go on for very long. Governments are going to step in. And therefore, corporations are going to have to address this issue that you have a flexible worker, but you have to protect various rights related to the flexible worker. And this is already beginning to be felt by companies like Uber and others when they go into certain other economies. We're not going to have just humans working in our company. We're going to have a lot of bots. So there's a workforce sitting inside the computer, and there's a workforce sitting in front of the computer. And soon there may be robots moving around, and there already are in many companies. How do we integrate all this? We are training robots to do their job better. We're also training humans to do their job better. And from a training department perspective, what is our role in making all this happen in a better way? Something to think about. Government, obviously, the big concern is, are we going to have half our population unemployed? Some people privileged, more and more people falling by the wayside. That's the big reason why anti-globalization is happening already in the world. You'll have a lot more people who are unproductive, a lot more aged. The percentages are changing, demographics are changing. Pressure on welfare benefits, serious problem in Europe already, beginning to be felt here too, and many other parts of the world. So 2 new concepts to think about: universal basic income. But from our perspective, is learning going to be the new package in social security? Our government's starting to look at learning insurance, competency insurance. I can tell you there's one government that is already doing it. That's where I come from, which is Singapore. They have set aside a whole organization called the Future Skills Organization of Singapore. I get paid 800 Singapore dollars every year, and every Singaporean, to invest in my own training. And now they're trying to figure out how to organize all kinds of training available from all over the world onto a single platform. And they got Udemy and Coursera and every possible supplier of good training. And they're doing national discounting of training content for the benefit of all Singaporeans. And the idea is, can you ultimately do actuarial calculations and create actually an insurance industry around learning? That's the big picture direction. Technology is the second area where trends are hitting us. So let's just take a look at a short video about this.
Technology is a moving target. In the kinetic enterprise, the only constant is change. The boundaries surrounding IT are fading as technology becomes integral to almost every business function and relationship. Instead of silos built around departments or projects, small, agile, diverse teams support products, services, and even business outcomes. In fact, traditional business products are being reimagined as services as organizations modernize core systems and the technology stack. Open standards, cloud-first designs, and loosely coupled architectures are the norm in startups. Now, large enterprises have similar ambitions. At the same time, data has never been a more critical asset. Advances in computer vision and pattern recognition allow companies to unlock insights from unstructured data. Insights that, until now, have been lost in the dark. Machine learning and cognitive technologies are augmenting human intelligence. This machine intelligence is helping companies make better decisions, embed complex analytics into customer and employee interactions, and, with the adoption of bots and complex robotic process automation, automate increasingly difficult tasks. Moving beyond computer screens, companies are exploring more immersive and engaging ways to combine the physical world and digital systems. Augmented reality, virtual reality, and the Internet of Things converge to create a new, mixed reality that's more natural, intuitive, and intelligent. Meanwhile, blockchain is emerging as the mainstay for digital identities in the evolving trust economy. And a few years down the line, advances in disruption forces like synthetic biology, energy storage, quantum computing, and nanotech could exponentially transform the way we do business. CIOs who can harness the possibilities of these technologies will be better positioned to shape the future of their business. Imagine, build, and run the future from the realities of today.
So that's technology in general, but let's talk about what technology could do for us. And this is a source from Gartner, the main technology areas that they are looking at becoming mainstream over the next few years. 5 of these 6 have a direct implication on learning. We take AI and machine learning. It's not only about teaching machines how to do things better. We can use AI and machine learning to improve how we do learning for humans. That's one. It's already happening. I think we have Nick here working for a company that specializes in this area, adaptive learning. Intelligent apps, again, we talk about Alexa, we talk about Google, we talk about Siri, and we have a little video on that a little bit later. What this technology can do is very much in our space of learning, being available at hand just in time to support any professional in any job when they need it. Okay? But we haven't yet figured out how to integrate it. The technology exists. Intelligent things, leaving aside drones and autonomous vehicles, but robots, again, in the field of learning, a lot of potential. Okay? Virtual augmented reality, we've talked about it before. I think this is going to be absolutely central to what's going to happen to learning going forward. Okay. I think we're at a tipping point. I've been dealing and talking to a number of companies in this space. I think give it 5 years, we'll find a very large part of what is done in learning today will shift into this environment. Okay. And it's becoming much more cost-effective than it ever was before. Digital twins, in a way, it's linked to virtual and augmented reality, creating literally a simulated environment of the real world so that you can actually learn in that space. Blockchain is probably the only thing that I can't figure out what it can have anything to do with the area of learning, but I'm sure there is something there. Okay. So I'm just going to switch ahead to the exponential organization. So we talked about the trends in demographics. We talked about the trends in technology. And now I want to talk a little bit about the trends in how organizations are evolving. And then I'll spend time on what does it mean for us.
Our old way of building a business was to get an asset or a workforce, put a legal boundary around it, and sell access to scarcity. Right? That's essentially the bedrock of business for several thousand years. We're entering a new world where these new businesses that I call exponential organizations are actually tapping into abundance. Uber is tapping into an abundance of extra cars around. Airbnb is tapping into an abundance of extra bedrooms that are lying around. And by enabling that abundance via technology, they're creating new business models around this, which is very dramatically threatening the status quo. If you're Airbnb, the marginal cost of adding a room to your inventory is almost zero. Right? If you're Hyatt, you have to build a whole new hotel. And so we're now going to see increasing numbers of industries attacked by new organizations that have a very low marginal cost to supply. And that's a huge challenge for an incumbent as to how do you deal with it. It used to be that disruptive innovation could only happen with a government research lab or a big corporate research lab. Today, we have a dozen technologies moving so fast at a cost of almost zero. Anybody can come into an industry with a beginner's mind, use new technologies, and completely make a massive change. Elon Musk may be the best example of this, right? No experience in the car industry, energy industry, solar industry, or space industry, yet he's created market leaders in all of those sectors. In fact, if you look at 3D printing, 5 years ago, how many people were aware of 3D printing in the room? Can I just see a show of hands? Right, very few of you. 3D printing is a 35-year-old technology. It's not new, but it's been slowly doubling in its price performance for 35 years. So when your price performance is 0.001 and you double to 0.002 and you double to 0.004 and then 0.008, it takes a long time to get to 1. Then it starts taking off, 2, 4, 8, 16, and everybody goes, good God, what the hell's going on? Right? But if you can spot it early, it's a huge opportunity. If you don't spot it early, it's a hugely disruptive effect on your businesses and on society. If you can spot it early, it's the biggest opportunity you could ever hope for because you can ride that pattern all the way up. Something we're doing a lot today is advising large organizations as to how to deal with it. Right? And so we're dealing with many of the Fortune 500 companies at a C-suite or board level saying, listen, wake up and smell the roses. This is a fundamental new world that we're living into. And then kind of leading them through a process to radically transform themselves. And large organizations now have quite a challenge. What do you do as an incumbent if you have new entries entering your marketplace or industry with no marginal cost of supply? How do you compete? We've identified like 10 attributes like staff on demand, community, algorithms, dashboard, the lean startup methodology. We found that if you deploy 4 out of the 10, you get the 10x performance improvement. So that's what we call an exponential organization.
One of the most powerful books that I have ever read, business books that I've ever read. How many of you have read this book? Again, if you are going to read only 2 books about what's happening in companies, please read these 2 books. They're really profound. They'll make you think very hard and make you look beyond next year and the year after as professionals in whichever industry you're in. So this basically highlights, and I'm not going to go through his entire model. I'll leave that to you reading the book. But essentially, he's identified some attributes which are external to the organization, which he calls scale. So staff on demand, that's the whole gig economy model. Using community and crowd, which is using external ecosystem. Using algorithms, like the page finder algorithm in Google, the power of the algorithms. Using leveraged assets, like Airbnb, third-party assets, don't have your own. And using engagement, and really investing in engagement science of how to interact and understand your consumer. Okay? So these are external capabilities, and the other ones are ideas, IDEAS, refer to the internal capabilities that an exponential organization would have. So interfaces are really about automated, intelligent, internal processes of the organization that connect your external consumer to your third-party ecosystem. So for example, if you take Airbnb or you take Uber, you have very intelligent software within the organization which provides that connection. And that's the core of the company, actually. Okay. Dashboards, no more monthly reviews, weekly reviews, quarterly reviews. This business operates every second. You've got to have real-time dashboards for your business. That's what dashboard means. Okay. Which also has implications on performance reviews, also has implications on, therefore, training. So everything is connected here. Experimentation, the whole new way of working is you can't sit and figure out the whole big shebang of what you want to build in your business over the next 3 years. It's going to have to be continuous experimentation. It also, therefore, means a much more autonomous structure. Teams that assemble and deassemble on projects and experiments all the time. There is no hierarchy. Maybe there is more of a holacracy or holacracy, as how many of you have heard that term? The new organization structure, which basically devolves and distributes accountability and responsibility. And of course, leveraging social, which means within your own employee workforce, but also the connection to the world and being open, as against what many companies today, while we go on to Twitter and we go on to all these platforms, we're still operating with the old mindset, actually. We don't actually want to have too much interaction with the world. We're just trying to protect ourselves and make sure that we are seen to be in the new world, though we're actually not in our minds. So if we take this model and we just try to summarize some of the things that I saw out of it, which might be relevant to us from a learning and from a HR viewpoint. Exponential organizations don't like having a lot of people on the rolls. The people that they have are going to be very highly competent people, very different work profile from the armies of people that you might have in some of your organizations. And they will be owner, vested people. They'll have much more tight connection to the results of the organization, like you have in an Uber or Airbnb. You'll have a lot of bots, and you'll have a lot of connected third-party workers. You leverage expert staff on demand. You exploit the power of the community and the crowd. Critical competencies that you'll need to build in the organization. These are just a sample list of some of those. Your organization structure is going to have to go through a change. Learning is going to have to be much more real-time. It's going to be much more lifelong, and I'll talk more about learning. Performance management is going to have to be continuous. It's going to have to be indexed in some way so that you're actually measuring learning, which most of us still struggle to do in a very scientific way today. And rewards and recognition, of course, also reflect the changing organization structures. All this that I talked about is actually not a long-term trend. It's already there. It's already impacting us, whether we like it or not. Okay. So look at the learning context. Tomorrow's learning context, if I just were to describe it, we have the world of work where things actually happen, being done by people, being done by gig workers, being done by bots. Work is happening. Every time work happens, data gets created, new information gets created, new knowledge gets created. That gets added to the repository of knowledge and skills. In the old fashion, it is updated on a very periodic basis, probably not updated very accurately, not very completely. But in the new world, everything that people do is actually possible to capture live, real time. So for example, in the Shell petrol pump, if you were to take one example, you have a camera there. The person who's working in that outlet is doing most of his work or her work on some kind of device. So almost everything that is actually happening in that workspace, there are real-time feeds available. Now imagine you could use that to track performance and to track errors and to therefore feed it back into the learning loop. Today the technology exists for that. In the past it was a dream. Today it's real. It's already being done, by the way, in the airline industry for pilots. Everything that happens on a plane, real time, is fed to Boeing and to Airbus. And that's used to do better training going forward. So with big data, with machine learning, you can continuously update the knowledge base, and you can make an updated knowledge base back to the world of work. Okay. And this is a continuous closed loop cycle. Create a system for that. Okay. It looks, of course, it sounds simpler than it actually is because the world of work needs to still be captured into much more concrete form. One big challenge we see is in that world of work, you have bots powered by machine intelligence, and you have humans. Okay. If you look at machine learning, the speed at which a machine learning system gathers knowledge is exponential. The speed at which you and I gather knowledge is probably exponential when we were babies. Then it kind of starts tapering off, and by the time we're 60 to 80, it probably starts going down because we start forgetting things. So that's the difference between the curve of human learning and machine learning. Now, in one lifetime, there could possibly be an advantage of that much between a machine learning and human learning. Take 10 lifetimes. The challenge here is that every time a new baby is born, unlike machine learning, where technology will build on the top of past learning without any jagged edge shift, new human beings have to learn from scratch all over again. Which means that not too long from now, machine intelligence has to be far more stronger than human intelligence. Something to think about. What does it actually mean? And what do we do as learning professionals, given that this could very well be a reality? Maybe it's not, but all the data is pointing towards that this gap is going to get wider and wider. So how do we address this gap? Today, without any training intervention, there's a certain rate of growth of individual knowledge. All the hard work that we do, we raise that to a certain level, but that's never going to match up to the rate at which intelligent artificial systems will gather knowledge and learn and grow faster. And who in the world is expected to bridge that gap? Us. We are the learning community. If we don't address this, nobody else is going to do it. Okay. So these are some of the strategies that we need to work on. And I think learning science as a field, we don't give enough attention to. The actual science of learning. How can we make a human being learn what they used to learn in 21 years in 1 year? Number one, we've already decided it's not possible. Okay. But maybe it is. So focus and investment of the learning community in learning science is something that is really going to have to go up. If that doesn't go up, there's no way you can bridge that gap. Everything else is around the core. Our business, it has to go digital to the core, which is get digital into the learning science function of the activity that we do. In all these changes, there's going to have to be a change in what the learner has to do, what learning has to do for the learner, what learning has to do for the company, what learning has to do for the government. And we also have this big question about who's responsible for learning, which I talked about before. So 3 big things that I want to leave you with. These are some ideas that we have on where we think this whole domain of learning needs to go. It's not just for companies, it's the subject of learning as a whole. The first is creating a framework and a model for lifelong human competency assurance, learning assurance or competency assurance. Okay. Second, moving towards creating something like a universal competency index, where you're actually able to measure accurately the level of competence of people at any point of time in a real-time way. And the third, building an environment that can actually deliver competency improvement in a much more accelerated way than it does today. Okay. Let me talk a little bit about each one of these. I mentioned before that my belief is that learning is now going to follow healthcare. What's the point in the government spending a lot of money keeping people alive if they can't work and they can't keep themselves occupied? Healthcare actually has already solved most of the health problems, which is why people are living to 100 plus. Okay. Governments are going to have to step in to do something about creating a learning assurance or a competency assurance. You do it in a small way. Unemployment insurance exists in some parts of the world, and that's so very limited. This is going to have to happen. And I'm not going to get into more detail on this, but I'm already seeing these discussions happening at various government levels. The second one is universal competency index. You've got the body of knowledge, you've got a person in a role. Where does this person stand vis-a-vis the level of competence he or she needs to have in that role? That body of knowledge is changing every day. This person's competence is changing every day. Can we think of a scenario where using technology, using the power of digital, we're actually able to measure, like a Fitbit, the person's health in real time, a person's competency index in real time at any point of time? If you talked about somebody having a Fitbit 10 years ago or 15 years ago, everybody would laugh. But it happened. Okay? No doubt, those are very physical metrics which are probably easier to measure than what we do in our industry. But a lot of things that were very difficult to measure are now being measured using technology. Now, if we have the learning assurance framework, if we have indices available and we're able to measure them, what remains is we have to have a mechanism to train people in an accelerated way. And these are some of the dimensions of the technologies that we want to bring into play to make that possible. But let me just use the next slide to illustrate where we could like to get to. So we have the world of work, where things actually happen. We have the repository of knowledge, which is all the subject knowledge of everything that's ever happened in that domain. It's available live today. You also have feeds of data on what people are doing in the real world, which I talked about before, which can also go and update that knowledge base live. And that's what you're using big data machine learning to improve the repository of knowledge. So content, by the way, will never be static again. Content is going to be dynamic. It's going to be updated real time. I conduct a course on a subject today. When I conduct it tomorrow, it's going to be different. It's not going to be the same again. If it is the same, it's outdated. It's going to have to change. Now imagine a scenario where you create a complete multi-sensory learning environment. AR, VR is starting to offer the promise for that, where you are able to simulate everything that happens in the real world, real time, which means every time a bank teller somewhere in Bank of America, all over the US, makes a new error, that new error has been fed into the system. And this gaming environment where 10 new trainees or recruits have joined the training program, they experience that new error the same day or the next day. This is starting to become possible. From a technology perspective, it's already possible. From an innovation perspective, we've got to think of finding the solutions. Something to think about. And finally, of course, let's not forget, you've got human workers and AI workers in your company. How do we manage this as HR, but also how do we manage it from a training perspective? One last thing I want to leave you with. How much investment is going into machine learning? Any guess? Billions. Google, Tencent, Alibaba, Facebook, who else? All the top 5 companies in India and in the US and China are investing billions in furthering machine learning. How much investment is going into learning science for humans? I think that's the big question we have to ask ourselves. If we, as a learning community, don't invest in learning science, we are actually contributing to increasing the gap between AI and machine learning and bots and humans who continue to learn at the same pace that we're currently learning today. And therefore, that's an important task for us to focus on. I want to just leave you with that.